These video folks talking about Cop City. This is Bad Faith podcast. Brianna Joy Gray, and she's talking about Cop City. And I want to know why are other leftist channels, what leftist channels talking about? Why are they not talking about Cop City? I just found out that Jimmy Dore is talking about Cop City and is interested. The guy who says he's not doesn't give it a culture, not about culture wars and you know what I mean, like racial and ethnic oppression. Should be about what the workers and the movement. They should disregard that. But on Cop City, he's saying no, I just get against the police state. He's saying he goes against the police state. And somebody who's saying that shouldn't be all these cultural issues, but economics. But he's saying Cop City is bad, the police state is bad. But others who are other leftists, the real leftists, so-called, who's and the other white leftists, who talk about cultural issues, cultural war, and other things, but they don't talk about Cop City. Interesting. But Jimmy Dore does. Even though I don't disagree with Jimmy Dore, he kind of gives the problem with Jimmy Dore. He kind of caters to Donald Trump. That's the problem. He said he never voted for Donald Trump, but I don't know. But he has an audience that does, I guess. He kind of cater to their audience, so that's a problem. He kind of shows for the Republican. He says the right things at times, and the vaccine thing, he's kind of crazy on that. To me, anyways. That's not the big issue, the vaccine. You know what I mean? Anyways, this is Cop City. They're talking about Cop City, and this like she's the only one that's talking about it, and some other RBN talks about it, Timudo, but other leftist channels, white leftists don't. I know black channels talk about it, definitely. But these guys are talking about Cop City. This is now they're trying to lock up, ban protesters or lock them up, actually. Lock up protesters. If you protest in Cop City in Atlanta, they want to arrest you now. Say you're a terrorist, it says here. Oh, hold on.
Of the AG's indictment is to make a smear and a sweeping indictment of anyone and everyone who's been involved in the resistance and or the movement to stop Cop City. That is where we're at. So you are completely correct. People who have done things, speaking out, people who potentially have made donations, people in other cities who've done actions and protests to say that they don't support the building of Cop City. Under the ideas and theory of this particular indictment, every one of us potentially can be charged in this conspiracy for supporting the stopping of Cop City. And so we're reaching a very dangerous precedent where basically organizers and activists and their activities are being criminalized to such an extent where everyone is at danger merely for just speaking out against the activities or the building of this government facility that no one asked for in the first place.
Yeah, I'm really having trouble wrapping my head around this because I understand that there have been criticisms of RICO generally for being overly broad, and I am very much attuned to those. But it also seems that even if you accept the value of RICO in a kind of mob, you know, mob prosecution context, the underlying crime is doing mob activities. It's selling drugs or murdering people or doing whatever, like actual crimes on the books. I'm just really struggling with how they are even framing. I don't know, maybe it would be helpful to read a little bit of the indictment, because I have seen passages of it being clipped and circulated on Twitter, because it's so unbelievable. The kind of wheel spinning that they do linguistically, defining terms that never seems to get, as far as I can tell, to the core of saying what is actually inappropriate outside of ancillary incidents, which again cannot be charged to the whole of what the underlying. Yeah, go ahead, Tiffany.
I was gonna say I just pulled it up, and one of the passages that is sticking out to me, it says, it's talking about the Defend the Atlanta Forest Coalition. The final sentence is, the purpose of these actions is to prevent the construction of the Atlanta Police Public Safety Training Center and a movie studio, all while promoting virulent anarchist ideals.
I'm sorry, is it illegal to promote anarchist ideals? Is being an anarchist now not one of the speech rights and political association rights we have as American citizens?
Right, and that's what's remarkable is that
You can't be an anarchist and a communist. You can't be, let alone a leftist. Well, you can still be a leftist, I guess.
in this document, the state is explicitly laying out how it is attempting to chill speech, So we know in criminal defense that indictments, especially of this size, are also messaging documents. And so in an indictment of this scale, there is no expectation that 61 people are convicted. There's no expectation that 61 people are tried. But what the message that AG Carr wants to send is the same message that the Georgia General Assembly has sent through some anti-protest legislation. It is, stay away from any movements attacking or addressing law enforcement or else. And unfortunately, it's a bipartisan effort because the city of Atlanta is in lockstep with the state of Georgia with these prosecutions. This being a prosecution initiated by the Attorney General doesn't let our local elected leaders off the hook. I don't believe this is an indictment that DA Willis would probably take on just looking at past behavior with protests. However, the city of Atlanta wants to hide behind partisan politics so that people point the finger at the Republican Party and for these prosecutions, rather than understanding that the Atlanta Police, the Georgia State Patrol, and all of these agencies are working together to attack the movement and ecosystem as it pertains to Cop City.
Well, let's get into the politics of it, because I did see, I think it was in some Democracy Now! Reporting, allegations that this is retribution, that this is vengeance for the Trump indictments specifically, and that there was so much kind of frustration, horror at the nature
If that could be true. Yeah, possible.
of this particular indictment, that at least one, is this true? At least one district attorney has resigned or said that she's going to have nothing more to do with the department.
District Attorney Sherry Boston in DeKalb County, which is the county where the land is, has recused herself from all prosecutions related to Cop City because she says that she has philosophical differences about prosecution. She differs from the state to that end. So she pulled away from all of the cases. So this means that the Attorney General will be responsible for staffing the prosecution for all of those cases in DeKalb County, as well as the ones that he has initiated in the other county, which is Fulton County.
Well, so more evidence of this being kind of very explicitly political in nature and bigger than Cop City, but more keyed into the broader social justice movement against police brutality, is the fact that the start date in the indictment for the conspiracy is the start date of the George Floyd uprising.
In fact, it's the start date for,
Yeah.
it's the date that George Floyd was killed, murdered by the police. And so, yes, it is.
Yeah, that's just a coincidence, I guess. This is terrible, folks. These guys are so vindictive. The police there, and the government there, very vindictive.
It's extremely telling that months before anybody, any organizer, activist, or citizen even knew that Cop City was in the works to be built, before it was made public at all, and so there was no organizing on Cop City, they have now traced the date of the conspiracy, of the criminal enterprise, to be the date that George Floyd was killed. And then the after effects of the uprisings and organizings that happened all across this country as the date of the criminal enterprise. And so that is amazing on its face, that they would do that they are basically laying out in plain sight that, as Tiffany said, any movement, any organizing against police violence will be treated as a criminal enterprise. And so that's what they're really laying out.
See that, folks? This is crazy. Maybe we're heading into a fascist state, folks. It's the state of Georgia, but it might happen all over the U.S. We'll see. Hope it doesn't spread here. But it's terrible.
That's why this case is bigger than just or different than just the politics involving Trump, because this is an attack by both Democrats and Republicans to basically go after organizers and activists who have said for now 7-10 years that.
Yep. See all these you get all these bad these democratic mayors of these blue states. They have bad police forces. I mean, they do terrible things. And they have corruption and do police brutality. And they're in a lot of these blue states. I mean, it's so yes, it's bipartisan. The police mentality, these police state propaganda is bipartisan. I mean, both parties do it.
That there needs to be a change in how policing is done. Folks have called for abolition, for defunding, for alternatives to be enacted around public safety. Instead of listening to any of that, the authorities have instead gone after these organizers and activists with various laws across the country. And now Georgia's becoming a test ground, not only with, of course, this new recent RICO indictment, but with the use of the domestic terrorism law that was first ever used here in Georgia in terms of its enactment against organizers and activists who've been opposed to Cop City.
So tell me about that. Let's get into that. What are these domestic terrorism charges? What are they characterizing as domestic terrorism in this context?
So the domestic terrorism charges, especially the ones stemming from the day that the Georgia State Patrol killed Tortuguita, include things like sleeping in tents, sleeping in hammocks, sleeping in trees. There are some. So
I heard of that case. They know about that case. That's terrible there. So I didn't hear about that case, but wow. See all these after the George Floyd, you think that the police brutalities died down, but all these cases they're still going on, and like the media. There's not big emphasis on it now. It seems like, or the mainstream media is not covering it as much, and maybe they're like these DAs and stuff and whatever. They're keeping it they're like hiding it more. It's not coming out as much, maybe, or it's not being leaked out. You know, seems like there's stuff going on every day. Even in that's like what's his name, Dr. Richie program on TYT. It's the best program on there. He has stories every day about police misconduct, and it's going on every day. But this thing is not, the mainstream media are not gonna report it. I mean, it's something like egregious. It's like police shooting. It's like the norm now. Like police shooting, mass shootings. It's like normal now. You don't see like the mainstream media reporting it every day. Even some of the independent media. Like this is just a thing now. They could. I mean, it's no big deal to beat up people, do crimes, misconduct, and it's normal now. No big deal. Like, you think George Floyd would change the whole thing, but no, it's the same. I mean, there's they did something about it, or they tried to, or I don't know. They couldn't pass legislation. The Democrats, or they didn't want to, but they didn't. Man, it's a failed system, and now it's getting more on the side of police. See, and giving more money to cops. Though there are some cities that will try to make reforms, but immediately they stopped. Because the way they did the reforms, some of these cities, defund the police, they did try something like that. Some cities in the States. But the way they did it, and they are pressured to abandon that. They didn't work out. And so now we reverse back to more policemen, more of a police state. They want to fund the police. And they say in the polls, they say people, see, I don't know if the polls are right. Like a majority of people want cops. But they want the cops, but they want to be fair, like fair for everybody. And you see, they did a poll about black. It was last year, I think, a poll about black people. And I don't know if it's New York City or Washington. Like 50%, no, and 70% wanted police or more police. So you wonder if these polls are accurate or what. It seems like from then on, like there've been more of a push to, I don't know, the media for policing. Now Biden is funding, give more to the police. You know what I mean? And these jurisdiction. It's like they're going, and then there's New York, Eric Adams, and he got elected, and then former cop. More of a police, going to more of a fascist state, like the US. I don't know.
So the occupation of the forest, which under the domestic terrorism statute would have to be critical infrastructure, sleeping in the forest doesn't threaten any infrastructure, right? When you think about destroying critical infrastructure, it means blowing up pipelines,
Right.
Severing plumbing, these sorts of things, sewage.
Right, which by the way, we talked about in other episodes like a year ago. They've been ratcheting up. They are, because of the climate activists recognizing that there's not going to be any political movement that is meaningful to stop the disastrous implications of climate change are, yes, engaging in actually trying to target critical infrastructure. There has been an incredible ratcheting up of penalties for that kind of protest, which now it seems, and people warned about this, that it wasn't going to stop there with the climate protesters, that it's trickling over into any and all forms of protest. And so now you're saying that people who are sleeping in a forest and having tents and hammocks in a forest are being charged with interfering with critical infrastructure.
Yes. So our domestic terrorism statute
Look
was
at that. You could also look at that as attack on homeless people too. Maybe that's more than that. It's kind of insidious. I don't think that's just for protesters. It could be like an attack on the homeless. I mean,
was enacted in 2017, and it was purportedly enacted to respond to Dylan Roof's massacre in North Carolina or South Carolina when he killed 9 worshipers. We knew then, so anytime we have new criminal penalties, we know the first place that it's visited is on Black, brown, and poor people, marginalized people. So these prosecutions are the first time in history that law has been used in a criminal prosecution. So Cop City is the first place where a statute intended to supposedly protect the same people that these protesters are protecting is being used against them. So the domestic terrorism statute also has other provisions, underlying felonies. If you want to intimidate or coerce a political actor, that can be domestic terrorism, which is should be subject to a First Amendment challenge, even that, right? But there are other provisions that can be used against these protesters because of the letter of the law. But most of the conduct alleged in those warrants is mundane, sort of like passive conduct just associated with occupying the forest. There are other domestic terrorism prosecutions from protests that happened in the street, and those more pertain to people having fireworks and other things that are intended to intimidate, according to the government. But the bulk of the people charged were charged in DeKalb County and were charged because of their occupation of the forest.
And even, I'm sorry, just to add one more point to it. And so there was also a bulk of people who were arrested who were attending a music festival.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be clear that it's not only the actual overt actions of civil disobedience and or direct action, even when there are so-called nonviolent acts of civil disobedience and direct action, which have been led to the charges of people who have domestic terrorism charges. People who literally were on their way to a music concert were stopped, separated from each other. People who had Georgia license were let go. People who had ID that was out of state ID were arrested and charged with domestic terrorism. This is the way in which this law has been applied, or these laws have been applied indiscriminately in some ways, but also targeting certain people to create the narrative or continue to present a narrative that these are outside agitators, that these are anarchists who are coming to destroy Atlanta, and to keep the focus on the fact that there is a huge amount of people in Atlanta who've been opposed since the very beginning to Cop City being built, who have been both leadership and outspoken about the fact that they don't want Cop City built. And instead of dealing with the fact that there is opposition to the building of this facility, what they've done instead, again, both at the city level, the state level, and the county level, have decided to instead to create a narrative which says this is outside agitators and they're the ones who are coming in destroying our great Atlanta way.
Yeah, I have had this exact argument with someone recently who was saying, when I brought up the overwhelming number of people who came to I keep calling it a notice and comment period, but what was it? The opportunity where people had to object publicly.
Public comment.
What was it? I'm sorry? The public comment?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. His pushback was, well, those were all out-of-towners. That was a coordinated political effort from outside agitators, yada, yada, yada. Can you speak to that criticism? Because I heard that coming from someone who's in the broad left community. I would say the part of the left that is engaging in some of the sympathy, well, maybe that's uncharitable of me to put it that way, who has been saying that the left is indifferent to victims of crime and needs to change its approach to crime, and has been opposed.
Been Cenk Uygur. TYT, yeah. Oh.
To abolition movements and things like that, but who still considers themselves part of the broad, let's call it a kind of Bernie left. Given that I'm hearing that from those sectors, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
I mean,
I don't think they're Bernie left. I don't think they're Bernie left would say that. I think you're wrong about that. They're not the Bernie left. I disagree.
I would say, first of all, that the people who I've seen talk about it in that way would not be people who I consider to be part of the broad left.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
People who are looking to criminalize the left and to try to put themselves in front of the left and be the so-called spokespeople of reason for progressive values. Those folks don't represent left values, particularly when they're out there trying to join forces with Trump supporters and make alignment with Trump supporters against the actual left as they organize against issues of concern to people in communities. Second,
Think about maybe Jimmy Dore, but he doesn't. But Jimmy Dore, in fairness, he's against police state. He's against the police state, so oddly enough. And Cenk Uygur is for the police state, Cop City. And Anna Kasper, and they're for Cop City. And they don't speak out against. They do propaganda every day on their show almost. So interesting. It's kind of weird. And Jimmy Dore is, but Jimmy Dore shows on everything else. Kind of shows for Trump. But in the other things, yes, it's weird. Because he's a good speak against police for the police state, TYT, and some say even the Majority Report, they do propaganda, or they're for the police state. So that's kind of what it is too. And see, they're considered progressive, TYT and Majority Report, and then Jimmy Dore is more like, they say he's a fake left, but he's not really left. I don't know. Interesting there. Yeah, because they're he's the fake left. Yeah, he's not really a leftist. I don't know. But the thing is, they're the left, so-called left, and they're shilling for the cops. They're doing the cop city. They're doing propaganda. So that's interesting.
second of all, anyone who was present, anyone who saw those two hearings back to back, those two public comments back to back at the city council, could clearly recognize the overwhelming majority of those folks were people from Atlanta. They were black people, they were brown people, they were people of faith, that they were environmentalists, they were organizers, they were everyday people, there were people who lived next to where the Walani Forest is and where Cop City is scheduled to be built. These were the people of Atlanta and greater Atlanta speaking up against the building of this police facility. Again, record numbers of people, the most ever to turn out for public comment, the most ever to come and do a demonstration inside and outside City Hall. Completely ignored by the city council, and then doubly ignored by our so-called allies and friends who are really not allied with the left at all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tiffany, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you about to say something to that?
I was just going to say that the reason that some have accepted the outside agitator narrative is because the Dickens administration has engaged in a pretty robust propaganda communications campaign, where not only did they canvass and knock doors and try to convince people that they want the facility, but also they have erected a website supposedly dispelling myths about the facility. And the talking points of Andre Dickens in press conferences suggests not only that these are outside agitators, but that these are rich white kids, trust fund kids. We've heard that thrown around here and there. And there's this irony because, of course, we have people in our city government who are the legacy of civil rights organizers who were called outside agitators when they went to Montgomery or when they went to Selma, when they went to Chicago, right? And so I think that it is the willingness to accept that narrative from Mayor Dickens. There was a GSU demonstration against Cop City where he was an invited speaker, and the students were engaged in sort of like a quiet protest. I think they just held up a banner in front of the podium where he was speaking, but they were white students, and he kept saying to them, "You have privilege. You're using your privilege, right?" And so now we never hear this man speak of white privilege when we're talking about the criminal legal systems. We do not hear him talk about white privilege when we're talking about houselessness or when we're talking about poverty.
Yep.
But or even when we're talking about education, we don't hear them raise the alarm or ring the alarm when it comes to race and racial disparities. But when it came to those students, all of a sudden he starts attacking them on the basis of their privilege.
This guy's like a coon. Like he doesn't care about his own own black Americans. I don't know, this mayor, who's a black mayor, I should say. So another black mayor who's against his own black people.
Privilege, and it's the way that neoliberals wield identity politics in a direction that obscures.
Yep, you're right. It's identity politics. But that's what Democrats do. He's a Democratic mayor. So
what harm they're really enacting on people. And this administration has been extremely aggressive not only when it comes to Cop City. We're talking about our jail, right? We're talking about the Department of Justice investigating Fulton County. All of these things are happening, and you don't hear anything from the mayor's office. But he has the most virulent and violent rhetoric when it comes to anything, even seemingly to suggest that law enforcement is on the wrong side of issues in this city. And I think for that reason, he is one of the most dangerous mayors of our time. I've worked across 3 mayoral administrations,
wow.
Some who are far more conservative than this mayor. But Mayor Dickens is willing to partner with people who would rather see black people dead in a way that is alarming. And he does it with arrogance, and he has a closed door.
That's a statement, folks. He'd rather see black people dead. Wow. This is a black mayor who would like to see his own black people dead. That's her opinion, but is it hyperbole or not? But yeah, this guy is just straight out cool. I mean, it's terrible.
Policy with his administration. There was a point where they called leaders into his office to talk about Cop City. I did not accept the invitation. We sent someone else from our organization. But the purpose of that meeting was to corral all of the leaders and try to get us on the same page, which was these were outside agitators who didn't have our best interests at heart, and no one took the bait. So then what happened next? You see him on the steps, I think, of the courthouse or city hall with black clergy saying that they support Cop City. But these were people who were disconnected from the broader movement, and it's becoming more and more difficult for them to have this reductive take on racial empowerment in Atlanta day by day.
I'm glad to hear that we're not in like a 2017 era where people, I think, more readily fell for blackface and high place saying a thing, we're going to go along with it. I guess we can thank Obama maybe a little bit for that, and people realize that they have to have a better analysis when they experience some disappointments in the wake of his presidency.
Yeah, maybe. But I never thought Obama was a savior. Like a lot of people, a lot of you all thinking he was a savior back then, but I never thought, I think viewing it from afar, I never thought he was a savior or, you know what I mean? He's just a, you know what I mean? You're saying that he's going to do this and that before he got elected. And I was, like, I wasn't against him. I was hoping he'd do changes, but I thought he was a Democrat. And never thought he was just this leftist. The Republicans think he was a communist or a leftist or communist. Yeah, they call him a communist, a leftist, straight out left. But he's like a Democrat, corporate Democrat. He's even a moderate. Obama was more of a moderate Democrat. Even that, almost conservative in some ways.
I want to come back just for a second to what we were talking about before with the domestic terrorism charges, because I have seen also one of the overt acts that is being surfaced, I think, by people who are hostile to the efforts of the Stop Cop City protesters, is the distribution of the flyers with the names of the police officers who killed Tortuga. So there is a discussion of flyers, of being arrested for flyers. Some of the flyers,
Wow.
it seems, did have the names and addresses
That's
of
terrible.
these cops on them. I
Yeah.
wanted you to speak to that, because I do think that's going to be one of the more polarizing bits of evidence here, where people
Yeah.
say, well, that really is a kind of a targeting of people, if you will, whereas the other side will obviously say, well, these people murdered a human being, and this is publicly available information. And to the extent that they feel unsafe, it's because they have committed a crime. I mean, what do you make of this?
I guess I'll start. I think this is clearly what should be considered protection under so-called First Amendment rights. There's nothing illegal whatsoever against flyering, and in fact, it's supposed to be one of our grounded constitutional rights is to petition and to protest. And so, for folks to be able to petition, to have targets of that petitioning, no one on the flyer said go to their house and take care of them. The flyer was, these are the people who are living in your neighborhood, the people who are responsible for the killing of an environmental activist named Manuel Tortuguita Teran. That was what the flyer was saying. Those folks were arrested and charged not only with domestic terrorism, but now also charged in the RICO statute for flyering. This is supposed to be clearly constitutionally protected speech. And at the end of the day, hopefully, a court that believes in its own constitution will decide that the charges should be thrown out even before it reaches a trial. But the fact that we're at a level where someone can get arrested for domestic terrorism, and then adding on to that a racketeering charge for giving out and distributing flyers of police officers who've engaged in a publicly known execution, a publicly known event, if we were to be timid or even-handed about it, for you not to be able to suggest somehow in public that there should be justice done in terms of folks understanding who these people are, what they've done, that these are your neighbors, that they should be brought to trial themselves. That instead of that being the protected speech, that the police go out and arrest these people and then charge them. This means the police are now a judge, jury, and executioner, and that the Attorney General's office has no legitimacy in terms of being even-handed, but specifically decides whatever is good, whatever they consider to be good for the police is something that they're going to protect, and that they're going to keep making sure that people are scared and don't exercise their so-called rights.
It's really horrifying. I mean, the idea that police are obviously privy to all kinds of private information about you, do these no-knock warrants, are incredibly invasive, rounded up those black socialist leaders last summer and had them sitting on the curb like a perp walk, are basically free to do all that they want to do. And the second anybody starts to try to push back against those exact same behaviors, their protest is criminalized and subject to more of that abuse by the police. I mean, it's the potential for a true freeze on any kind of protest in the United States, from environmental protests to criminal justice protests. I believe somebody said it, maybe it was one of you, that this, under this kind of standard, the entire civil rights movement would be a RICO violation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. If we apply this, and of course the civil rights movement was attacked by policing authorities, by prosecutorial authorities, by the federal government. And so what we're seeing here is a reenactment of some of those things, but with different tools being applied, right? Different tools being applied. But the whole idea of the civil rights movement engaging in civil disobedience, engaging in direct action, breaking laws to show the unjustness of those laws. And then if we look back in history and apply the same theories that the Attorney General is now applying, the whole civil rights movement could be under a RICO indictment for the very actions that they took, for people who engaged in marches and demonstrations, people who boycotted at lunch counters. All of them could be indicted in a conspiracy theory under the rubric of what we're seeing right now.
I mean, this indictment, I'll come back to you, Tiffany. This indictment is like, the crime is having a certain kind of politics. The crime is a belief system. For all that so many conservatives were worried and anticipated that the Trump indictment would be really an attack on his ability to do free speech, it does seem like the people who drafted that indictment were much more careful in sidestepping those kinds of accusations, going out of their way to say what Trump said on the day of 1/6 isn't what this is about. That wasn't illegal behavior. He can say what he wants from the podium and say what he wants to say on TV and say that he thinks he won the election, but it was these specific acts of trying to overturn the election. In this, exactly. It doesn't seem like there was any effort to try to do...
That's a great point.
That. In fact, to the contrary, there are paragraphs devoted to defining belief systems as though those belief systems themselves are illegal. There's a section called Anarchy, Background of Defend the Atlantic Forest, where they go on for anarchy is a philosophy that is opposed to forms of authority or hierarchy. Beginnings of anarchist ideals date back centuries through the use of the term anarchy. The use of the term anarchy did not exist in the 1800s. Over time, blah blah blah. It's like a Wikipedia entry on anarchy that seems to be jammed in here for no other purpose than to suggest very strongly that having that political belief is in of itself illegal. There's this wacky. I'm seeing this come up at one point in a paragraph 148 of the indictment. One of these so-called overt acts seems to be that a gentleman named Jeffrey Parsons signed his name ACAB. You're not allowed to sign your name. You're not allowed to write ACAB anymore. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching.
Yeah. Here you go, folks. This happened, her episode, Bad Faith, was 11 days ago. So, what do you think of this, folks? Why is she the only one that's talking about this? I mean, even on Democracy Now, they talk about this. I mean, that's more of a mainstream media, Democracy Now, but on the leftist media, they're not talking about this. You know what I mean? I think The Hill, I think The Hill might have talked about this. I'm not sure. The Hill might have talked about this. And Jimmy Dore mentioned this just not a few days ago about the Cop City. Yeah, he mentioned Cop City. I know the black media is talking about this, independent channels. Why are the white leftist channels are not talking about this? See? It's a good question. All you white leftist channels. I mean, do you support you really support propaganda, I guess? Maybe it doesn't affect them, I guess. But it will affect them eventually. If you do something that affects black people, eventually, if they come for black people, they're gonna come for you. And then we see recently, I have seen and I've been recently, but like, there's like police misconduct, police brutality against some white folks. Uh, you know what I mean? Or harassment, I could say. And more like harassment to being stopped by the police. Some people have been stopped by the police, they're driving and they're being harassed. I mean, and they're told they can't do this. Some they're told that they can't film, they can't use their phone, they can't film them doing corruption. Remember this white guy, I think said he can't be, the police said he can't film him, he's doing something bad. And the guy he's filming the cop, and he said that you're not allowed to film him to with his phone. Yeah, so they're being so they're targeted. So white folks are being targeted too. I mean, not just minorities, black and brown people. I mean, and of course they attack. And we're not going to see as much, but they do like harass poor whites. Some of these cops. You know what I mean? But you see some of these videos, like the middle class guys, and they're being stopped by the police. But anyways, folks, what do you think about this? What do you think about this Cop City? No one else talking about this. I'm glad Bree's talking about this. And we all should not want a police state, folks, but there all should be justice. Everybody treated fairly and equally. That's how it should be. Anyways, Al out.